Welcome back to Real Clear Politics. I'm Andrew Walworth. I have Carl Cannon with me, and we're joined now by Brendan Steinhauser. He is the CEO of the Alliance for Secure AI. Brendan, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So, Brendan, I looked at your background. You worked for FreedomWorks. You helped run Republican John Cornyn's re-election campaign for the Senate back in 2014, and you even helped organize the Tea Party March on Washington back in 2009, which I remember. So I sort of assume that you are not a big fan of government intervention in markets, yet here you are heading up this organization that seeks to regulate AI. So is that a switch, or what's your reasoning?
Yeah, I think I've always been a person that's had a little bit of skepticism for big government, and certainly as well for big business, especially when the two collaborate. That always makes me a little nervous. But from my perspective, I think the best thing we can do with AI to make sure it works for us, for human beings, is for the industry to really to regulate itself. I think through public scrutiny and through accountability, through good journalism and through nonprofit watchdogs, calling things as they see them and asking for policy changes internally to these companies. I think that would be the best outcome, is to have them kind of regulate themselves. I always believe that laws should come after that, especially federal laws. I think that first we want to see companies take care of it themselves. We haven't seen evidence that they're necessarily going to do that. And so I think there is a bit of a case to have states take some lead on this. And then also the federal government do things as it relates to national security and international affairs in particular. But it is a tough one. AI is a unique policy area in a lot of ways. It also has some similarities to other things that I've worked on in the past, but we can certainly get into some of that more in the conversation.
There was the Washington Post had a story. They did some AI generated images, and one of them was a giraffe walking through neighborhoods. Another was John F. Kennedy, his famous speech about, we go to the moon not because it is hard, but because of cheese. They have instead of easy. And it was obvious, right? And they sent it to eight platforms, TikTok, Facebook, all the famous ones, AI, OpenAI, and all of these platforms had said they would issue warnings when things were AI generated. None of them did so. And only one of the eight, even if you explored it and asked and looked past the page, even acknowledged that it was. So industry is already not doing what they said they would do. So is this something Republicans and Democrats, who, by the way, can't even open the government, but is this something they can agree on and fasten legislation? And if so, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the answer is yes. And National Review actually had a great piece recently about how Republicans and Democrats can't agree on nearly anything, but they can agree on AI safety and security. And it was a great piece talking about folks like Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri and Senator Blackburn from Tennessee, teaming up with Democrats like Senator Blumenthal and others to work on this issue. And I think that there are some areas for agreement, especially as it relates to some of the more serious concerns. I mean, I think the development of kind of a super intelligence, something that is far smarter than humans and faster than human beings, is something that we've seen Republicans and Democrats in Congress get together on and try and understand, because that's a whole new level of technology that we've never seen before. And so I think that's a great example. We've also seen Republicans and Democrats work together in Congress and in states to try and pass legislation to protect children online from AI-generated content, especially child pornography. We've seen them work together to try and prevent chatbots from encouraging things like self-harm and even suicide. And so I do think we've already seen a track record by Republicans and Democrats in DC and around the country to work on this issue. It is really unique. It does have some very serious implications. And I think both parties kind of understand that. And interestingly enough, the folks that are racing ahead are really just a few folks in Silicon Valley who have everything to gain. But I think the American people are kind of with Republicans and Democrats on this one.
Yeah, I want to talk about that regulatory framework for a second, because it seems to me that there is sort of an Uber problem, if you will, as you point out, like what is this thing, and what are these sort of unknowns? But there are sort of known problems, and you identified some of them. And I'm wondering, are we really going to end up with a patchwork and a piecemeal approach to this, where, there's financial aspects? I mean, what is AI doing what does it mean for the markets? Well, that's sort of one basket. Then there's protecting children, which, we sort of have seen that on the internet as well. That's a well-traveled sort of regulatory path. And there's a whole sort of regime for doing that. You've got the mental health component, which you've pointed out and we've talked about on this show. I mean, what happens when people are romantically involved with their online artificial intelligence lovers? There are these sort of various aspects. And so when you look at it, is the proper approach to take this sort of piecemeal approach and sort of, break it down to its component elements? Or is there a need for some omnibus sort of approach that sort of puts a prophylactic over the whole thing?
I've got friends on both sides of this debate, and I have friends on the conservative side of the aisle who are on different sides of this debate. And so it's a really important question. I think we're all coming to it from a different perspective and landing different places. But, in my mind, I do think there's a critical role for the states to play. For example, in Texas, they passed a bill last session that prevented the use of AI by state agencies to do things like spy on its citizens and discriminate against them, or create a social credit system in the state of Texas. To me, that's something that a state should be doing, and only a state could really do, to prevent state agencies from using AI in that way. In Ohio, they're actually leading on a bill that would prevent personhood for AI. So it sounds kind of weird, but we're kind of talking about this already, but preventing marriage between a robot and a human being, which is something we're going to have to confront in time. And so those are state issues that I think states absolutely should be legislating on, in addition to protecting children online. But as I've talked to U.S. senators and members of Congress on the House side as well, we recognize that there are certain things, for example, as it relates to national security and international affairs, that are more appropriate for the federal government to handle and to work on, whether that's in the White House or the purview of the State Department or other agencies. And so I do think these issues, some are domestic, some are national, and some are international in scope. But I definitely do believe, as kind of a person that, from first principles believes in the 10th Amendment and the principle of federalism, I do believe states have a right and a duty to act, especially because the federal government really hasn't provided a national standard yet. And so that's something we're working on with Congress and continuing those conversations.
Let me ask you a more cosmic question. Is it too late to just kill this thing altogether? That's my preferred solution.
Carl is our resident Luddite when it comes to AI.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. In fact, the people building this technology don't know the answer to that question. They don't know if it's sort of too late, if we've already crossed the Rubicon and we'll get artificial general intelligence and then artificial superintelligence after that. Some people think we're kind of on that path already. Others are more skeptical and think we may never get there. We could get there in 20 years. But it seems like this is moving, and it's moving very fast. And again, back to those first principles, I really do worry. I do have concerns about developing essentially an artificial species of machines that is going to be thousands of times smarter than us, thousands of times faster than us. And as you merge AI with robotics, then you get into some really weird territory. And by the way, there are people lobbying now for personhood and rights for robots. So that is a thing we are going to have to confront in the near future. So it may be too late. It may not be. I certainly hope it's not. And I believe that we still have agency. It's not inevitable that we still can have some impact on this as human beings, as Americans, to weigh in on this. And I think we have to. I think this is that critical of an issue that we have to put some safeguards in place now to prevent some potential real danger in the near future.
Yeah. Senator Cruz has introduced this legislation. It's a great acronym. The acronym is Sandbox, the Sandbox Act. What that means is strengthening artificial intelligence normalization and diffusion by oversight and experimentation. So somehow that ends. You put that together, you get Sandbox. But the idea is that it creates a regulatory sandbox, which, according to his office, quote, gives AI developers space to test and launch new AI technologies without being held back by outdated or inflexible federal rules. Is he on to something there? And do you support the idea of this sandbox? And maybe I could explain a little bit better than I did what it really is.
No, it is. It's a great acronym, as we often get in DC. I wish I could say I was one of the creative people to come up with something like that, but I've not been able to.
Maybe it was AI.
But no, yeah, exactly. Maybe so. Yeah, it's the idea of a testing ground, a regulatory sandbox. Essentially, is something that's been used in other industries. I know some states have actually created something similar to see what might make sense and what might work and what might not work. And we've had conversations with Senator Cruz. I actually was an early supporter of his back in 2011 in his first race for U.S. Senate in Texas, where I'm from. And so we've had a lot of conversations about AI policy over the last couple of years. I think that one of my concerns with the Sandbox Act is just that it would potentially waive regulations for some of these companies for a very long time, for years. And I think that this industry is moving so fast, and the development is moving at, it's not in terms of years, it's moving in terms of months or even weeks. And so it's going to be hard to, to get me on board with waiving regulations for years. I think we have to be thoughtful about it. I think we have to look at what makes sense and what's working. And we have to sort of, give ourselves the ability to step in if necessary. And again, I believe that regulation should be a last resort. I believe that regulation should be light-handed, light touch. And I really believe that companies need to do most of this stuff themselves. And they are capable of doing a lot of it on their own. For example, they need to enhance their own security, their information and physical security at the frontier labs where they develop this stuff, so the Chinese just don't come in and steal it. They need to do their own testing, which they do some of this. And in fact, some of the companies have released some of those results, which we applaud. And so there's a lot of things they could and should be doing. And I really hope that industry will kind of be good patriotic citizens and do the right thing and act kind of in the interest of not just their bottom line, but in the interest of all Americans and frankly, people around the world. I'm just a little skeptical based on what they've done so far and what social media companies have done, that they will do that. So I still want to reserve the right for states to get involved in the regulatory framework. And I don't want to see companies be able to avoid regulation for the long term from the federal government.
Last question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Carl.
Well, I've got one. Yeah, listen, I get the states, I get the federalism argument, but it seems to me that AI can just, makes a mockery of state boundaries, even national boundaries. It just exists in cyberspace now. And I just explain to me why, Ohio's doing something. Now you talk about state agencies. I get that, but shouldn't there be rules of the road for this country? What's allowed and what's not allowed? You were on an interview. I was it Newsmax? I can't recall, but it was, this chatbots encouraging people to cut themselves and hurt themselves and encourage Satanism. I mean, Ohio could pass a law against that, but, what if a kid who lives in Ohio is, got a VPN in Alaska? I mean, shouldn't there be some national standards?
I do think there should be national standards on certainly certain topics. And I think that what we hope is that by the states moving and passing good legislation to protect their citizens, that will spark the federal government to do more. Now, obviously, we're discussing this in the midst of a government shutdown. But look, I've spoken with Senator Cruz about this, and we were talking about finding narrow, specific legislation that we could work together on to target some of these things. And so, look, I think states are moving because the federal government has not yet put together that standard. But I think a lot of organizations in our broad coalition, would support some federal standards if we had some confidence and some kind of promises, if you will, that we could count on, that we would get some good legislation on a lot of these things. But until then, I think we're going to continue to look to states to lead those efforts. But yeah, I mean, not just on national security, do you need kind of a national standard? But I think on some of these other issues, it would be really good to have Congress take a more active role. And there have been some good bills that have been introduced. Some of them are bipartisan on some of these topics. So we need to get some traction there and move quickly, because AI is rapidly advancing and we are behind the curve so far.
Is there a worry, though, that by imposing regulation here at home on this technology, and we saw this with the internet, Congress is not really on the cutting edge of knowledge when it comes to these kinds of things, and the hearings are kind of cringy worthy, if you remember those, when they were talking to the tech guys and sort of didn't even know what a dial-up was and this sort of thing. Is it a legitimate worry that by regulating this, we somehow hamper the industry just at a time when China is sort of forging ahead, and that we end up tying the hands of our tech companies at a time when we really need them to be out in front on this technology, which appears like it's going to sort of change the whole world, and we don't want to be left behind?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we think about this a lot and feel pretty strongly that innovation and safety go hand in hand. If you think about the airline industry, for example, there's a situation where if that industry is seen as unsafe, if we have too many crashes, people are not going to fly, and that's going to have a devastating impact on that industry and on our economy. And so we believe that by putting some, light touch safeguards, guardrails on the technology that still allow us to innovate and to dominate around the world, that is the best approach. The Chinese are going to cut corners, right? In the race to AI development, they're probably going to cut corners and people are going to get hurt. And frankly, their own people will be kind of victims of that. And so will people around the world. But if the United States can lead AI development with something that people are confident in as being safe and secure, and an AI that is not rotting our brains and encouraging self-harm and suicide or Satan worship, as was pointed out in the Atlantic article on that topic, then I think we can have more confidence that American AI will lead the world. I think people want that. We don't want to have to get into a situation where we're racing with the Chinese, we're racing with each other. We cut corners on safety, and then we have a lot of bad outcomes at the end of that. And I think looking at social media, for example, as a recent example, the last 15 years or so, is a great test case to see some of the harms that were created there. It does make me wonder if we would have put some safeguards in place on the early end, would we have saved a lot of children? Would we have prevented a lot of the harms of now current adults who were coming of age during that time when social media was basically getting started? And we've seen the impact on kids from what social media can do. AI is going to be far more powerful than that.
Yeah. All right. Well, Brendan, we're going to have to leave it there. But thanks for coming on. We'll have you back. This is interesting stuff, something that we care about. And Carl may at some point decide that AI is going to be around and embrace it. I don't know. But for now, he remains our House Luddite on this. Anyway.